Alumni Relations and Advancement Programming. I work closely with our student alumni ambassadors, our YM Summium members who are our graduates of the last decade, and on-campus alumni events. Before I introduce you to our presenters, I wanted to remind you that the College Advancement Team is committed to keeping our alumni engaged. Be sure to keep an eye out for our weekly and Summian Connections emails that list upcoming events and opportunities to stay connected. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the college's website for those who could not make it live today. Please be sure to use your Q&A button on your screen to submit any questions. I'm excited to introduce you to our two presenters for today's webinar, Being Confident with Your Finances When the World Seems Uncertain. Karen Clark graduated in 2010, majoring in math with economics. She worked for 5 years at Fidelity Investments, specializing in workplace and personal investments, while also studying to receive her MBA. In 2015, she left Fidelity to pursue her passion in data analytics as a business intelligence analyst at Allegro Microsystems. Karen has also remained actively engaged with St. A's, currently serving as the Vice President for our Alumni Council. Brent Kiley is a 1999 graduate of St. Anselm College and is an Ameriprise franchise owner in Bedford, New Hampshire. He is a certified financial planner and chief executive officer of Rise Private Wealth Management with 21 years of experience in financial services. He helps families, business owners, and professionals set and achieve their financial goals. Brent and his team help clients grow their wealth, reduce their taxes, and protect their businesses and estates for their loved ones. He serves on the board of Mental Health Center of Greater Manchester, volunteers on other committees in the community. Rise Private Wealth Management now has offices in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, Kansas, and Florida, serving clients across the US. On the rare occasion that he's not watching his kids play sports, Brett enjoys playing golf and spending time at the lake with his wife and his 2 children. I'm going to turn it over to you guys now.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks for such a nice opening. Karen, it sounds like we're kind of a big deal when you get intros like that, doesn't it?
It really does.
But, I'm passing a milestone this year as an alumnus of St. Anselm. I'll be 22 years graduated, since my graduation. And funny enough, I graduated at the age of 22. So that's kind of one of those weird milestones that makes you feel a little bit older. But I just want to say it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today and chatting with all of you folks. And, Karen and I got to connect before we did this today, and we're just here to help. Like, we just know we've gone through some things over time with Karen and her background, strong financial background, and what I do every day, helping people reach their financial goals. My passion is helping people. It's why I'm in the business that I'm in. It's why I love what I do. And I was recruited right out of St. Anselm College to be a financial advisor. And I'll never forget the day the recruiter came in and gave a presentation about being a financial advisor. And she said that to be a great financial advisor, you have to have the mind of a capitalist and the heart of a social worker. And from that very moment, I was hooked. I could have a career where I could help people reach their financial goals. And by doing that, I'd be able to reach mine. So it's been an amazing journey over these last 22 years or so. And so our goal, our mutual goal today is if you can walk away with 1 or 2 things that improves your financial life, we would call today successful. So we have some things that we want to run through that are some of the basic financial almost requirements in life, things that aren't necessarily taught unless you take a personal finance class at St. Anselm or handed maybe down from your parents. Some of this stuff is learned, and I know Karen's learned it along the way. I've learned it along the way, and we want to impart some good financial behaviors and habits because, again, you can learn the hard way or you can learn by listening to some folks that have gone through it already. So, with that, I'll get up our deck and our slides. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. You can do that via the chat feature, and we'll either try to answer them along the way or we'll definitely get to them, in the remaining session. So we're hoping maybe 30, 35 minutes of content and, want to make sure that we're answering questions along the way. So we're just running through the technology. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Oops. Karen, do we see that all right?
Yes. I was going to say you practiced too many times before and it's going to work on you this time.
Oh my goodness, no doubt. So the purpose of this slide is to talk about how people come from all different walks of life, and everyone wants something a little bit different for themselves. So when I think of this slide and I think of people's goals and what they want for themselves, everyone's a little bit different. What I try to do is I try to help people build their financial wealth, which is the hard dollars and cents in life, to give them financial security, but I also help them build their life wealth. And to me, those are the things that you're looking to do. It may be some experiences like having extra time with your family or having some incredible, memorable vacations. And again, about experiences with folks. You know, it may be that you want to give back to the community and you want to spend more time doing that, and you want to have some financial resources to do that. So everyone has some different goals and come from different financial backgrounds. And what we want to do is give you those financial foundational steps to really improve your current financial life. And the agenda for today is talk about the importance of setting goals, because I think too many people just approach financial stuff, you know, whatever's thrown at them day to day. You've got bills, you got paychecks, you're trying to make things all ends meet, but it's important to take a step back to actually have a game plan, because most people spend more time planning a vacation than they do their actual financial future. We'll talk about some ideas and some strategies that you can use when it comes to budgeting and saving money. We won't get too complicated with the investment stuff today. Happy to answer any questions, but we want to leave you with some ideas to actually help you start building long-term wealth, and of course, good habits and behaviors moving forward. So when it comes to goal setting, we've got a few goals that people start out with, and I find it's interesting whether people are 30 years old or 60 years old. We run into people all the time that have these type of questions or issues. I'm working with some clients right now that I've met in the last few years, and you'd be surprised that they make almost $300,000 a year, but they have a hard time building a cash reserve. They don't have much of a cash reserve at all, and you're like, that's just strange. It's weird. But I've seen people that make $100,000 a year that save $30,000 a year, and I've seen people make $500,000 a year that spend $550,000 a year. And you're like, how does that happen? And we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about how it's very difficult, to show up in this world and just to make ends meet. And the world has become really, really good at separating us from our money. But this is talking about some goals of how do I, save more than I spend? How do I pay off debt? And again, how to build money and wealth for the future. A lot of long-term financial goals people have for themselves may be like retirement or college planning. But it may be more of a midterm goal, like, hey, we want to buy our first house and start building wealth that way.
One thing in terms of those goals that I think is very important is you don't have to have your life planned out in terms of, by the time I'm 30, I want to own a house. By the time I'm 35, I want to have kids. You certainly could have those goals, but the first goal here, save more than I spend. No matter where you're going or where you end up kind of setting those goals for the future, if you're saving more than you spend, you're setting yourself up for that success 5 years from now, when maybe you have a better sense of where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I see that a lot when it comes to retirement planning and college planning, the trade-off between the two. Sometimes the better financial shape you're in, the more you're able to help and address college planning, right? So building for the future, put it in places where we can use it for retirement, for college, for buying a home. That's a great point. But it's starting with some of the basic stuff for sure, Karen. So let's talk about some of the basic stuff. Let's talk about budgeting. And you can really take your expenses and put them into two major categories: essential and lifestyle expenses. So essential expenses are kind of the guaranteed expenses in life. Just by showing up, you're going to see these expenses. So it could be rent, it could be a mortgage, it could be a car payment, it could be food and health. Sometimes just some of the basic essentials of clothing, although clothing, as Karen and I talked about offline, can go into a lot of different areas and could start gravitating towards lifestyle. But these expenses kind of show up no matter what's going on in life. And then lifestyle expenses is the hobbies, the vacations, the eating out. It could be jewelry. It could be maybe having a really large clothing budget. And believe me, I've seen some really large clothing budgets. And how people spend their money. But one of the things to think about is how you earmark money towards these different buckets of expenses. And one simple rule that you can take a look at and follow is the 50-20-30 income rule. And this is actually, you can Google this. It was an article in Forbes back in 2016. It still definitely applies today. Is as a target, you'd like to see about 50% of your money go towards your essential expenses, 20% to financial goals, and 30% is flexible. And what flexible means is that maybe you need to spend a little bit more of that money to pay off debt, or maybe you need a little bit more to enjoy yourself and enjoy the ride along the way, which I'm a big believer of. So these are guidelines, and sometimes in life, you may have 60% of your money going towards your essential expenses and not 50. But this is a place that you want to go to. Most people that are saving 20% of their income for their financial goals are in pretty good shape. But it takes a little bit to get there, and we can talk about some strategies to do that. Any thoughts here, Karen?
Primarily, I think just the 50-20-30 rule is a really good starting point for most people. I think, especially first leaving college, the hardest thing is you probably are in an income bracket that you're hoping to grow over the first 5-10 years of your career. You might not have the money to go and immediately start living on your own, have your own apartment, get that dog that you want to get. And some of those decisions, even though you might look at them as essential expenses, housing, an essential expense, but living with a roommate versus getting a place on your own where you're responsible for 100% of the maintenance, the cost, is certainly going to make a difference in terms of actually achieving that 50-20-30 rule. And I know in our conversation prior leading up to this, animals, it's one of those things that you look at it, and once that you have an animal or a pet or a child or any other dependent that you bring into your life, that then becomes another essential expense, providing housing, food. All of those things that are essential expenses for you are now the essential expenses for that dependent on you. It might be a lifestyle choice, but it's also going to have that huge impact on how you're budgeting, how you're living your life, and how you're able to hit those financial goals.
Yeah, that's a great point. I tell retirees all the time that pets are actually the fourth highest expense a retiree could have. And I've seen it recently. I mean, COVID has been a lot of folks getting new animals. Dogs are very popular. And then people are coming back and saying, "Boy, this is a little bit more expensive than I thought it was going to be." So it's good to be really mindful of that. Another thing that I like to do in terms of budgeting is there's a certain percentage of the population that will really budget. They'll write down all their expenses. They'll itemize everything. They'll keep track of everything. And I find people that try to get into that habit, for most folks, it doesn't stick. I think one simple thing that I did right when I started, just managing my own money and my own paychecks after college is I would pay my bills when they came in, because it kind of started to build a little bit of a buffer inside of my checking account, because I would pay those kind of essential expenses first. And that way, anything that's left over after I pay those expenses, I felt like was a little bit more easy to access in terms of lifestyle. So if you kind of get rid of your bills first, and this also goes to the mantra of pay yourself first, but in a different way. We'll talk about pay yourself first in terms of building wealth in a bit, but getting also those essential expenses out of the way is definitely a good habit to get into. And we'll talk about credit cards, but we can do something similar when we use credit cards and try to get those bills down, from day-to-day spending. So let's talk a little bit about debt. I think one of the first things people need to do with debt, and while I think it's difficult for people to really budget and create a spreadsheet and to keep track of their expenses, I think it's really, really important to spend a moment and write down what your debts are. Write down what the balance, the interest is, the payments that you have, and calculate based on the payments you're making now when it's going to be paid off. Again, this is a really good exercise because it creates mindfulness over, defining reality and where things stand. Just putting this down on paper and having clients do this, it makes them more aware of how they're spending money. And when you're mindful of that, your behaviors and actions can change quite a bit. Obviously, paying bills on time can build up a good credit score. People often wonder what their credit score even is. A great resource is annualcreditreport.com. So again, annualcreditreport.com. You are allowed to get one credit score each year and credit report each year for free. They will try to get you to sign up for more, but if you kind of want to lay of the land and what things look like, you can go to that website and get that credit score immediately. And clearly, one of the biggest measurements of building up a good credit score is paying things on time. And again, getting ahead of that is even better, or starting to automate some of these expenses is a good idea. And then making your credit card work for you. So a few things to tie all of this together. If one of your primary goals right now is to pay off debt, and you do have credit card debt, the first thing that I'd recommend doing is to stop using your credit card, right? Because if you use a credit card and then you don't pay the balance off by the end of the month, you've really done something like writing a check out of your checking account when there's no money in there. And you may have to have a little reality check with yourself that your lifestyle may be ahead of what you can financially afford right now. So stop using credit cards is the first thing to do, and start operating more on a cash only basis and operating more on a debit card basis. And it's really hard for me to make that recommendation because if people use debit cards over credit cards, as we know, there's a lot of risk and fraud in the world right now. And having a credit card offers some protection against that, against fraudulent charges, where a debit card, while there is protection, it takes a little bit longer to clean up and the money leaves your bank account, right? And that's not fun. But one way that you could, stop building credit card debt is to use your credit card as a debit card. And what I mean by that is the nice thing about a debit card is if you make a charge today, it's pretty much out of your bank account overnight, and it's reflected in your balance the next day. Whereas with a credit card, you can buy something today, you don't really feel anything, right? And no money leaves your bank account. But if you do that for an entire month and then you get that big bill and you're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to pay it? If you paid it along the way, it's a better thing to do. So I know we spend time on our phones, and sometimes I'm guilty of spending too much time, but while you're on your phone, it's very easy within 30 seconds to pay off your credit card. So if you make some purchases today or tomorrow, I would go in every couple of days and pay off your credit card. That way you're using your credit card as a debit card, but it's giving you the protection along the way. And importantly, it's also can build up points. It can build up points for fun stuff like travel, food, vacation, gift cards. So I like that. I always like to get the most out of the credit cards that we can. And I have a little bit more on the debt side, Karen. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts that you'd like to add.
Thanks, Brent. I think Brent hit everything here pretty perfectly. A lot of times when I was working at Fidelity and I was in more of a workplace and personal investing space, I found that a lot of people didn't know what went into a credit score. They didn't know how to check their credit score. It was just something that when they end up being denied for financing on a house or whatever their purchase that they're trying to make, when they end up being denied, they're like, well, what caused that? What did I do wrong? And usually it was a delinquent payment. It was something that maybe was 10 years ago and it was still affecting that score because either they never ended up paying it, it went to collections. Maybe it was something that they just forgot was a bill that they had. But that really does have a huge impact on your ability to be financially independent as you go and try to make some of those major purchases. I know I was talking to someone last night who was telling me, girl that she knows, she's 20, she had to buy a car. She has a 20% interest rate on
Oh,
her
goodness.
auto loan. And she didn't have good credit going in. She needed a car. So that's the rate that she ended up paying. And obviously, anyone who has a good financial head on their body knows a 20% interest rate, you're paying 20% significantly more than what that car is worth just so that you have a car to drive to work. So definitely keep an eye on it. And I don't know her personal situation, but I would guess that she is one that has racked up some credit card debt that is also causing that score to be not as good as it potentially could be.
Yeah. No, that's too bad. Clearly that auto loan's like a credit card,
Yeah.
interest rate. So that's sad to see. In terms of the debt, another thing that Karen and I talked about was, how to pay off debt is the snowball method. And this is something that you can get a book out there by Dave Ramsey if you want to challenge yourself and pay off debt. I think it's called A Complete Debt Makeover. I can't remember the exact name, but it's by Dave Ramsey. And what he preaches is the snowball method. And I love it because human beings, as a human being, we're emotional and it's good to have wins. So while sometimes logically it makes sense to pay off something that has a higher balance and a higher interest rate, sometimes it makes sense to pay off something with a low balance first and get rid of it because it's a win. If you've got 4 major debts you're looking to get rid of and you pay off one quickly, you feel some momentum, right? And now you've got that snowball effect and you're feeling like you've got momentum, and then you can take that money and redirect it. So part of the exercise, of course, tracking your debt is making a spreadsheet, seeing where all the payments are going, what the interest rates are, but target whatever has the lowest balance, make minimum payments on everything else, but overpay and send extra cash flow towards the one with the smaller balance. And you'll get rid of it quickly. And then you can take the payment you're throwing towards that low balance one and throw it at the next lowest balance, right? And moving up that way. So you're snowballing, you're feeling good, you're paying debt off, and you get that cash flow that you can start to work with and start to pay off the debt quicker. The idea with the snowball as well is that can work well when we talk about cars. So, we can talk about cars all day. I mean, cars should get you from point A to point B. And when you get it paid off, it should probably just stay that way and don't worry about getting a new car. Because again, it should be getting you to point A to point B. But if you take that car payment, whatever it was, $400 a month, $300, $500, and you redirect that towards either paying off debt or setting it aside in a cash reserve, we'll talk about cash in a second, then you'll actually be redirecting that money in a habit and behavior you're already used to and doing something good with it, right? Most people will pay off a car and then they'll just keep rolling along, right? They haven't done anything purposeful with the money. And then what happens with that cash flow? Well, it's one or two things. Either it's saved or it's spent. And most of the time it just kind of gets absorbed in your budget and spent. So the snowball method works that if you don't even have debt, you want to take that payment and do something really positive with it. Maybe it's build up cash, maybe it's pay down another debt, or maybe it's in starting to put some money away for the long term.
And Brent, before we move forward with the next slide, somebody asked a question of, don't you sometimes need to finance something like a new refrigerator or a house expense on a credit card, and kind of how to balance those expenses as well.
Yeah, so I mean, you're talking about making a purchase of like a refrigerator, right? That's obviously something that you absolutely need. And if you got to put it on a credit card, that makes sense as long as we have the cash in reserve to make the purchase. So sometimes if it's planned, what we want to do is be unlike the average American who buys something first and then figures out how to pay for it later, is actually plan ahead. And we can talk a little bit about how to do that when we look at building a cash reserve up, which is coming up next. But sometimes we got to look at the refrigerator, and I know I've been guilty. Like I upgraded my refrigerator, and it's kind of like, well, did I need to upgrade my refrigerator, or did I want to upgrade my refrigerator? Right? Did I want to get the water dispenser in the ice cube maker, or was I okay with it? So if it's unplanned, again, that's an emergency, and we'll talk about it. But if it's something you're planning for, we got to start setting aside the money ahead of time. We can put it on the credit card, but then we want to pay the credit card off before the end of the month.
And I think with some of those big purchases, the other thing that you can take advantage of is the zero interest financing, assuming that you qualify for it. A lot of companies do offer that. You want to be careful. You don't want to open a company or a credit card at every store that you shop at, because then you just have open lines of credit. It will certainly have an impact on that credit score, and you're more likely to forget to pay something off. But if you need that refrigerator, maybe Best Buy has a zero interest financing for 6 months. As long as you know that you're paying off enough so that that's completely paid off in those 6 months, no harm, no foul from paying extra interest that you really don't want to be paying at a 25% potential APR rate. So trying to do it intelligently and plan ahead, I think, to Brent's point, is the best way to do it. But if you find yourself in that situation, look at your options and don't just buy the shiniest, newest, first available model that you find that might look great in your space, but puts you in a much worse financial position.
Yeah, great points. And I feel like a lot of people run into issues with credit card because the one thing that they lack is a cash reserve. And the statistics are pretty amazing out there. I'm not sure if folks have ever seen it, but more than half the country lives paycheck to paycheck. They're literally just waiting to get the next paycheck just to continue to make ends meet. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we want people to be unlike the average American when it comes to this. And we want people to have cash reserves. I mean, the average American doesn't have a cash reserve. And people would love sometimes to have even $300 or $500 in a cash reserve position. It's amazing, these stats. But one of the things that I help people do is break the cycle of not having a reserve and starting to build one. And a cash reserve, to me, it's essential. It's that place you can run to in case there's an emergency, like we can use the refrigerator breaking down and needing a new one, or an opportunity like, hey, we really want a new refrigerator and we've been saving for it. You need to have the cash available to purchase it, right? So a cash reserve is there for emergencies as well as opportunities. And one of the things that I think is really important to do, and one of the basic cornerstones of financial planning, is to build a cash reserve and almost do that ahead of most things. Even when we're talking about paying off debt, it doesn't make sense to pay off debt when one emergency, whether it's the refrigerator breaking down or the car needing a repair or new tires, and then you got to use your credit card to make that happen. Well, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing anything else. So a cash reserve is just as essential as paying off debt, and they really should be happening simultaneously. One of the strategies that I like to do is I like to set a cash reserve out of sight, out of mind. Again, because we're human beings, and I remember, right after college, I'd have a checking and a savings account. They would link to each other. We could move them pretty quickly, the money from one account to the other via our phone. So I'd put money in my savings, but it would end up in my checking pretty quickly. And so I never really built a reserve until I got in the behavior and the habit of sending that money out of sight, out of mind. So one of my favorite things to do and to show clients how to do this is to go to a website like bankrate.com, bankrate.com, or another one that's really easy to remember, it's good, is NerdWallet. So it's got kind of a fun, catchy name, nerdwallet.com. and they will list higher yielding online savings accounts, which are FDIC insured. You'll recognize a lot of the names on there, but everything's is online. It's not bricks and mortar. And you can send money there via ACH, which is just electronic transfer between your checking account and their savings account, and it gets there in a couple of business days. But it's out of sight, out of mind, right? You got to think a little bit if you're going to tap that place. And the best thing to do is just keep sending money there until one of these emergencies comes up. The best way to do it, in my opinion, is depending on how often you get paid, is to time out some type of contribution to the account on the same day. So if you get paid biweekly and you're getting a check tomorrow, you could have $50 a paycheck go right into the savings account, or $100 a paycheck go right in the savings account. So when the money comes into your checking account, it's literally leaving at the same time and going to that far off place to build your cash reserve. Again, it's like two ships crossing in the night, out of sight, out of mind, and then you can start to build a reserve. Another thing that these online savings accounts do is they allow you to set up either subsets or multiple accounts. And what I like to have clients do is rename these accounts. And this is a psychological thing, because if you start naming your accounts like cash reserve or vacation fund or new home fund, you're going to be less likely to tap it for an everyday expense or something that might come up that you want to spend money on because you're out shopping and you're thinking about, hey, that'd be nice to have. But you're going to not want to tap your vacation fund because that is how you're going to go on vacation and pay for it without going into credit card debt. So I call them electronic envelopes. Back in the day, people used to use paper envelopes, and they literally take cash and put it in paper envelopes. And, I'm talking like 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they would go to their utility company and give them the cash envelope, or they would go to Sears and give them their cash envelope. It happened a lot in Manchester, New Hampshire. They'd walk up and down Elm Street and pay off different stores using cash envelopes. Well, these are electronic envelopes, and you get to psychologically see, okay, I've got this much in vacation fund that's on track. I have this much in my emergency fund, it's on track. My new home fund. It's just a way for you to actually start building a cash reserve. So when that refrigerator scenario comes up, you have a bucket set aside in your emergency reserve. Karen, any thoughts on cash reserves?
I think you hit just about everything. They are certainly crucial, and it's something, even having gone through the home buying process, and for me, when I went through the home buying process, I was casually looking for houses. It's always one of those things. I had, over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, I had put offers on maybe 3 houses. I was looking for something with some waterfront. And it was one of those things that then this house popped up and no one had looked at it, or no one had put an offer in a couple weeks. And especially in the housing market that we're in now. So I bought my house about a year ago. Housing market was hot, not as hot as it is now. But it was one of those things that when I found the house, it's like, okay, now I've got 30 days and that down payment is due. You can't scrounge up the money at that point. You already have to be planning for that, know that you have that reserve wherever it sits, and know that you haven't been just taking money out of it periodically for the last 5 years. You have to be comfortable with having that, or else everything is going to be so much more difficult from those longer term goal perspectives.
Absolutely. And again, this is where if you pay off a debt, a great place to redirect that car payment is into a cash reserve envelope or a cash reserve bucket for yourself. And people usually ask, like, how much money should I have in a cash reserve position? A typical financial planner will say 3 to 6 months expenses, which if you think about that, sometimes that's daunting, right? The first thing to do is get to 1 month. Just get to 1 month of reserve expenses. You will feel amazing just to have that reserve and have that set out of mind. And then you can start working to 2 and 3 and 4. And everyone has a different situation, but I always say, let's just get to 1 month first. Get that money out of sight, out of mind, and keep challenging yourself. And typically when people start building the reserves and they start sending some money out of their paychecks, the way I described, they don't miss it.
And that's, consistency is key for all of this. It's, the cash reserve is only as good as your commitment to continuing to fund that cash reserve. So if it's something that one month it's like, oh, I have the extra money, I'll send it over this month. And then the next month it's like, well, I really want this new pair of shoes, or I want whatever. Once that you start making those bargains with yourself, that cash reserve is going to suffer and your future finances will suffer.
Yeah, it's really all about priorities. So a great exercise I do with clients is I sit down with them and we brainstorm. I say, tell me all your goals. What do you want to do? What do you want to do in the short term, the midterm, the long term? And they start telling me everything. Like they want to retire. They want to send their kids to college. They want to go on vacations. They want to, renovate their house. They want to buy a new car. And we put it all down and then we say, okay, now let's start prioritizing. What's most important to you? No matter what, you absolutely want to do this. And then they'll start really prioritizing. Like they'll say, okay, we want to retire. We want to send our kids to college. We want to reserve. We want to pay off debt. And some of the other lifestyle things they shared are starting to slowly fall to the bottom of the list because it's just the trade-off. The first thing I learned in my first economics class at St. Anselm College on the very first day was economics is just the study of supply and demand, and it's the allocation of scarce resources. And whatever you spend today is going to be less to spend tomorrow. And again, it's that trade-off of enjoying the ride along the way, but also planning for the future. So live for today, plan for tomorrow, but it's having a good game plan and having some priorities.
I like to think of that in terms of the Davison meal plan that I'm sure we all remember. And I know I was one of those that by the last few weeks of the semester, I was eating pasta for just about every meal, because I might have eaten too much or too many of the higher priced items early in the year. And it really is the same where you want everything that we hear today, you hear is live for today, tomorrow isn't guaranteed, that mindset. But tomorrow may not be guaranteed, but if you have tomorrow, do you want to be eating pasta for the rest of your life because you can't afford something else? Probably not. So having a smart plan allows you to still enjoy today, but also set yourself up to enjoy whatever future we are lucky enough to have.
Yeah, it's good. And as you've said, and I said in the beginning, it's really about having a game plan and sitting down and figure out what's most important to you and, start looking at some of those trade-offs. Let's talk a little bit about investing. So this is a really cool chart that Karen and I wanted to share with you, because it shows the cost of waiting to actually start saving. And people usually say, well, I don't have any money to invest or to save, but it's a little bit over a long time that makes a difference. Not all of a sudden saying, oh, I've got a whole bunch of money, now I can save, because it's about the time value of money. So this is an example that starts off showing you, what if you start to save $5,000 a year for 30 years, assuming a 6% rate of return, and over 30 years, that turns into 419,000. But if you wait 10 years, again, that's what a lot of people say is, I'm going to wait until this is better or this happens first. But that 10 years cost you a couple $100,000 in terms of waiting, and real dollars that gets you. And then some people will show up on our doorstep. They say, okay, our kids are off to college. We got through that. Now we're ready to start saving for retirement, but they're not going to get much of that growth in their investment portfolio with the time value of money and compounding interest. So one of the things that Karen and I really wanted to make sure that we impart to you is the importance of getting started. Is sometimes action is better than meditation. Action is better than overthinking things or over planning things. When it comes to retirement savings, and I usually do a workshop like this in person at St. Anselm College to the seniors that are graduating. And I did one in February of last year before COVID hit. And my ideal scenario is that when students graduate, they're going to be making more money than they ever made. I'd love to see them put 10% away into their 401k plan and put it into the Roth bucket and have that be tax-free for them forever, and then increase their rate of savings 1 or 2% per year. And if they did that for 10 years or so, I bet they're going to be 100% on track for their retirement. And then they have their spouse, their partner do that as well. It could be compounded by that. But sometimes when you're a little bit later on in life and you're not sure where to begin, Karen and I are talking about the importance of taking advantage of a company match, which Karen, I'd love your thoughts on in a moment. But it's better just to start putting 1% away and 2% away than not doing anything. And I'll tell you right now, and I usually say this to clients, if we increase your savings, into a 401k plan by 1%, do you even think you would know it happened? And the answer is usually, no, probably not, right? Because it's such a small amount. But if they did that every year for the next 10 and 20 years, they'd probably have more money than they could possibly thought they could build on their own. But by not doing anything, they're hurt by that. So, sometimes it's as simple as 1 or 2% a year can just get you going. Karen, do you want to talk about the company match, though, that's usually available if you work for an employer?
I would love to. So a lot of employers, if you're lucky, offer some kind of company match. Sometimes it can be as low as 1%. It can go up to, the best that I've seen is 7%, which is what Fidelity offered at the time that I was working there. But ultimately, it's one of those things that if you put that any percentage up to that percent into your 401k, they put dollar for dollar the same amount in for you. Sometimes there are vesting rules, so you have to stay with the company for a certain number of years to be able to be entitled to that money. Honestly, that's why I stayed at Fidelity for 5 years, because that was when I was fully vested to all of the money that they put in my account for me. And I was on the phone with HR to make sure that my 2 days of that final month of my 5th year qualified me for the entire month, and I wasn't going to throw away the 40% of their contributions that I would have lost if I had left any sooner. And that for me was primarily because I was passionate about analytics and data, and that's why I wanted to move in a different direction from the direction that Brent found himself taking. But it's something that, at a bare minimum, when I was working at Fidelity and workplace investing, it was always trying to get clients to put in the maximum that their company would match, because it's free money. It's maybe not money that you can use right now to go out, grab a drink with friends, or buy that new refrigerator, but it's 5% of, or however much your company is matching, it's that percent of free money. All you have to do is actually invest in yourself and put your own money in. They want to also make that investment in you. It's also something that I realized how privileged I was having that upbringing and being at Fidelity and talking to clients every day, because when I was maybe 30, a friend of mine at the gym had posted something on one of the social medias, and it was just an open-ended, does anyone our age, she was about the same age as me, does anyone actually have $100,000 in a retirement account? And I looked at it and I was kind of blown away, because I had been focusing on those fundamentals. I was like, does anyone not? But again, it goes back to, I had that education. As soon as I left St. A's, I went right to Fidelity, and it was instilled. You have to be investing in your retirement account. We're putting 7% in for you. As long as you put your 7% in, a lot of companies will have an annual increase program where, without even thinking about it, they'll allow you to enroll, and it will just boost your contributions, your own contributions, by 1%. So again, to Brent's point, probably not enough money that you would actually notice that it's not going into your checking account, but it's taking advantage of that time value of money. It's getting that money invested, because generally anything that you're putting into a 401k or an IRA, you're probably getting it into some kind of a fund, whether that's a mutual fund, which I know Brent can talk a little bit more about the funds that are available, but they make it easy now, easier than ever, to get it in a fund that will continue growing with you and also be personalized to a general retirement age in terms of when you might retire.
Yeah, so just on the investment side, most retirement plans are your 401k, a 403b, a 457 plan if you're working for a town, and sometimes state. they have a lineup of investment options. And one of the best places to go is something called the target date fund, which Karen was alluding to. And a target date fund, what it does is on or about the day or the year or the time frame you think you might retire. So if it's 30 years from now, you'd be targeting a 2050 fund, and you can put your money in that fund. And what it will do is it'll start off more aggressive. And then as you get closer to retirement, it'll naturally become more conservative for you. So you don't even have to think about it. They're going to manage the risk. They're going to rebalance and make substitutions if an investment's underperforming. But it'll start off more aggressive, naturally become more conservative based on the time horizon that you're giving it. So I believe that 95% of people should probably put their money into a fund like that if they're not working with a professional, unless they're highly educated and they know what they're doing. They can stick with a good game plan no matter what's going on in the market. So if you can get up to that, get 1 or 2% in there. If you're just starting out, try and get 10 and keep going from there, and use the target date fund, consider the Roth bucket. That is the best place to start to get going. And then in terms of ongoing savings, another simple strategy is to save half of every raise, half of every bonus, half of every tax refund that's coming up. So if you get a 2% increase, put 1% more in your retirement plan, you keep 1%. If you get 4, do 2 into the 401k plan, 2 into your own checking account for spending and for fun. If you get a tax refund of a couple thousand, take $1,000 and put it in that online savings account. Put it towards debt and get rid of it. Getting rid of some of this debt, like student loan debt, like once it's gone, it's gone. It's a great thing, and it's a great investment. But that's how things can snowball if you look at it that way. But most people don't do that, and what happens is they experience lifestyle creep, where they spend exactly what they make because they never take money off the top and start tucking it away. So again, you want to be unlike the average American, and unlike people that make hundreds of thousands of dollars that don't save any of it and they spend it all because they never stopped along the way to save money and put it aside.
And the other thing,
go ahead.
The other thing that I think is important anytime that we're talking about investments, and I see that there was a question on, do you recommend younger people put their money in a higher risk investment? And I think that Brent has already answered that. It's certainly something, especially from a retirement standpoint, generally it would be recommended for that to go into a higher risk because you have a longer time frame to when you actually need that money. If you're saving for something that's a shorter term investment, that house that you want to buy in 5 years, whatever the case may be, maybe you want a little more safety with that money and you want it in a less aggressive fund. Yeah. That's perfectly fine. But the key to investing is, especially when you're young, not making emotional decisions, because as soon as you see your account go down in value, bad day on the stock market, if you sell out, you're just locking in any of those losses that you've taken. So you really, whether you don't look at that account every day, so you don't see those fluctuations, that's my recommendation, is set it, forget it. And especially if you're in a target date fund, you don't have to go and rebalance frequently, but try to avoid those emotional decisions. And I'm sure, Brent, you're probably half psychologist there in the office when you're just talking people off of the ledge after they've lost thousands of dollars when they look at their account at the end of the day.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it happened last March with COVID hitting and the market going down about 33%, right? And, you talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes that is paper loss. And I think what's important regarding with what you said, Karen, is if you're talking about GameStop and Bitcoin, like that's not investing, that's speculation. And that's taking on a lot of risk. If you're talking about risk in terms of investing in a broad-based stock market index like the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies in the US and some of the greatest companies in the world, the longer time horizon you have, the more of those shares you would want to buy now. Because, my little secret I'll share is that the market's never gone down and stayed down. The market is a representation of, some of the best companies in the world that people show up at every single day to go to work, to improve their own lot in life, to help their company get ahead and be rewarded for those behaviors and habits. Now, if that goes away and the world ends, all bets are off, right? Can't help you there. But as long as that happens and continues to happen, people don't lose money by staying invested in the market over a long period of time in weathering those ups and downs that Karen talked about. They lose money when they buy in and then it goes down. They said, I don't like that feeling of seeing that paper loss, and they sell, and then they've locked in those losses and it never comes back. But even after 08, 09, the market came back. Even after what happened last year and every other historical time period going back forever, we always make a comeback. So that's really important to keep in mind when you're investing. And time horizon is important. Short time horizon, stock or your money shouldn't be in the stock market when you're going to buy a home in 5 years. But if you get 20 and 30 years, chances are the market's going to be higher and the world will be a better off place. So do we have other questions? I want to make sure that we hit on questions that people have before we completely wrap up the slides here.
Yeah, there was one other question that said, how do you talk with your younger clients about saving money when they're not making as much as some other people? They may have car payments, student loans, rent, utilities, groceries. How do you keep them positive about either saving or paying off their debts when they feel like it's just an endless cycle because they're not making 100,000, 200,000, they're making maybe 30?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We run into it a lot. One of my favorite things to do is with some of our clients is to work with their adult children that, again, are just graduating and they're about to go out in the world and start making decisions and give them a path to go on. So I think one of the first things I'm going to mention is that one of the myths that out there is people need to have a lot of money to work with an advisor, and that's not the case. A financial planner, a good financial planner's job is to help you build wealth over time. So if anything, I would encourage everyone, especially in the virtual world we're living, you got the entire United States and arguably the world to choose from, is maybe consider looking at a financial advisor, someone that charges a fee for service and for giving advice. You don't need to have money to work with an advisor who can help you build your wealth over time. But it is difficult, and Karen and I did talk about it. Like, there's a lot that's coming at you, but this is where you have to prioritize. You have to look at everything. You got to see where your money's going, and there's got to be more sacrifices early on to get ahead. I remember when we rented a place in Boston when I graduated. Like, we didn't live in the city because it was too expensive. We lived out in the suburbs, and we rented a house, and we had 3 roommates. We got another one and put them in the dining room, because that was another way we could split the rent 4 ways instead of 3, right? So we made a sacrifice. I drove a car that was probably completely rusted and on its 3rd engine for many, many years. These are sacrifices you make to get ahead, but I think it starts with those little things. It's like putting $25 away into that savings account, right? It's, maybe put that 1% away into the 401k plan. It's not overspending. You see so many people around you living a life that's fictitious because they have tons of credit card debt. They may look like they're driving a fancy car, but they have credit card debt, they have a huge car payment, and they're not saving any money for themselves. So you got to have a plan. You got to take a look at what's most important to you, and it will take sacrifice. I didn't even go out to eat for lunch until I was like 30. I've got young folks in my office that go out like every day. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you can't do that and try to get ahead and save. Now, if you're on track for your goals, do that. Go out for lunch every day, go buy a luxury car, go to Starbucks whenever you want. But if not, early on, it's really hard because, again, the world is really good at getting our money away from us.
And I think that we also tend to attribute things or experiences, even if that's buying a coffee at Starbucks every day, with happiness. And sometimes you have to take a step back and really think about, well, how much better or how much happier am I with that coffee from Starbucks versus if I had an espresso machine at my house, which, okay, it's an investment up front, but then I'm not paying over $5 a drink every day. And also, especially if I was going back to my young 20s, I would have been, and Brent and I had talked about this, I would have probably been appalled for some of that time if I actually wrote down everything that I was buying and I looked at it on a weekly basis. It's like, wait, how much money did I spend at the bar last night? Or when I went out to dinner? When you think about, especially, we had talked about this as well, going out to dinner, maybe you do go out to dinner on occasion. Maybe it's important to you. But if you go out to dinner and you get 3 drinks with dinner, your bill is going to be significantly higher than if you can go out to dinner and have water with dinner. And then you still get that experience of going out to a restaurant, going on a date, whatever the case may be, without necessarily spending a lot more. So it's small sacrifices, making those sacrifices where you can, maybe not shopping at Whole Foods when you can go to Hannaford or Market Basket, somewhere where the groceries are relatively cheaper. Making those decisions early on and knowing the impact that they have on your financial picture.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. And so just to wrap up a little bit, and again, we can hang out for some questions. It's about starting with having a game plan. Just spend a few moments and write down what's most important to you and what you're looking to accomplish, and make it a little bit time bound. Say, this is what I want to do, in the next 3 months. This is what I want to do this year, and take some action towards that. If anything, 1 or 2 things you can walk away and use for yourselves today. Just take some action to get on track. Consider the snowball method to get rid of debt, right? Get those wins by paying off those low debts first and then redirecting the money. And what we're talking about now is where your money's going. And believe me, we want you to enjoy life and enjoy the ride along the way, but it's those trade-offs. Starbucks is your thing, then great. But there may have to be some give and take. You may have to sacrifice somewhere else. And I know for any alum, from St. Anselm, my passion is to help people. So if you've got questions and concerns and, you didn't ask a question today, I'm happy to have a conversation with you just so I can point you in the right direction. Because I love what I do. I very often will meet people that we can't help, but we will point them in the right direction. And we will give them good ideas that they can use for themselves, because that's why I show up every day in this world, is to continue to help people. Sometimes it's professionally, sometimes it's just making the community a better place. Other questions that we have?
There haven't been any other questions that came in. A comment did come in, Karen, when you were talking about your pasta, about did you have too many late night calzones in the coffee shop?
My coffee shop budget was separated from my Davison budget. So, but yes, I did, like everyone else.
Absolutely. It's like a rite of passage.
If there are any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A button or in the chat box. Give it a few minutes.
Yeah, and I mentioned before, I am totally biased for people to work with financial advisors. I really am. But I see the difference it makes in people's lives. And when people start working with one, they usually come back to us within the first couple of meetings and says, boy, I wish I did this 5 or 10 years ago. Because then they realize that, on the other side of complexity is simplicity. And there's some easy things to do. And sometimes people just need that gentle nudge in the right direction to get going.
And I think a lot of people don't necessarily have a financial mentor, because it's certainly something that if your parents instilled good values, if you can talk to them about your finances,
yes,
that could also be an advising role. But in the society that we live in, because so much is superficial and so much is debt ridden, finances are almost a taboo topic. So you don't talk about it with your friends, and you don't talk about that purchase that you made or how much you're paying on your car or any of these things. So you just think that you're in this normal situation, whereas talking to someone with that experience, with that education, can be so eye-opening in terms of taking it so that it's not a taboo topic and you actually feel confident in your plan.
absolutely. And, we do this exercise a lot with folks. If you line up 2 30-year-olds and they both meet with a financial advisor, and one says, we had a great meeting, but I'm going to do this on my own, and the other one actually engages with a financial advisor, and you fast forward 30 years, who's ahead? Who's ahead financially? I'd argue every time it's the person that worked with the financial advisor, and the gap's not even close. Because someone that does this every day and can be that coach and that mentor will get you further ahead. And as Karen's pointing out, it doesn't even have to be someone you hire, but someone that's in your circle that can give you some advice. You know, for students that are still in school, it could be a professor. You know, say, hey, this is what I'm facing. Can you help me out a little bit? But use the alumni network. There's great advisors out there. But again, we just want you to take some action that brings you financial happiness and a little bit of financial peace of mind.
Before we sign off, we did get one quick question of, do you recommend any tools like Mint or any other budget trackers?
Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, anything that will help automate this stuff. You know, I use, I was thinking about Mint, and because I was talking about like a spreadsheet, that's like seems a little archaic, right? So Mint or Quicken, clients, when they come in and they've got Mint or Quicken up, I'm like, wow, they've already taken some really good steps for themselves and put that together. But yeah, it's a good tool, but like anything else, it needs work, right? You got to update those passwords and make sure everything's loading and correcting. But I do like those tools because it makes you aware of where your money's going.
Wonderful. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, but thank you so much for being here and for doing this. Thank you everyone for coming. We will post this on our website. It has been recorded. So if any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to one of us or to reach out to Brent and Karen. But thank you all so much. Have a great